Welcome to today's Software AG webcast titled Improving Your EA Fortunes, Sharing Best Practices in Enterprise Architecture Across Federal Organizations. Today's webcast will be presented by Nelson de la Cruz, Senior Solutions Architect at Software AG. As we move through today's presentation, we invite you to submit any questions that you may have via the Q&A box, which is located on the bottom center of your webcast dashboard. We will address your questions at the end of today's program. In the event that we're not able to answer your question, your submission will be noted, and today's presenter will be back in touch with you as soon as possible. Today's presentation is being recorded. This program recording will be made available to you in an email that will be sent to you within approximately 24 hours. It is now my pleasure to welcome Nelson de la Cruz.
Thank you, Will. I appreciate it, and hello to everyone. I have started presentations in the past by quoting Steve Jobs, who has, in fact, I believe, quoted Pablo Picasso. And that is by saying, good artists copy and great artists steal. And what Steve Jobs meant by that in stealing ideas is not necessarily that it was a bad thing, but to take some idea and then make it your own. And so what I want to do today is share some stories that I have experienced with customers within the federal government and related aerospace organizations, and I've also worked with some state and local agencies as well. Share their stories with you, and feel free to use those and see how you could adapt them and make them your own. So when I talk about the fortunes and how do we improve our EA fortunes, you may be wondering what it was I was talking about. And in this case, I'm talking about fortune cookie fortunes. And a little anecdote about myself is that I am a big fan of Vietnamese pho, which is the Vietnamese noodle soup. It's a great comfort food, especially on those cold, rainy days. And in the particular restaurant that I visit, they offer fortune cookies. So I will take my fortune cookie. And as you can see, these are not really the fortunes as we think about, but just various sayings. And if I like it, I'll keep it around. And I took a picture of them here. And I thought I would use them as a storyline here, or as a thread, so that I could share my stories with you. So the first one here, the first fortune is a wise man knows everything and a shrewd one knows everyone. And what I wanted to share here, I know it's a slide with a lot of text on it, but it was an email that I received from the Digital Government Institute, and actually spoke with them, or spoke to an audience of their members just a week ago. But prior to that, I received this email now a couple of months ago from today. And I will read it out to you, at least in portions. What I really like about each sentence is that it sends a great message about enterprise architecture. So starting at the beginning here, enterprise architecture is about understanding the business, the mission, and how to maintain, improve, fix, or transform it, often involving IT as a transformational mechanism. And so that's a great, simple definition of the role, if you will, of enterprise architecture within organizations. Saying, how do we align IT with the business? I often call that as the holy grail of enterprise architecture. And that's really what we want to be able to do or achieve as EA practitioners. Let's move on to the next sentence where it says, it helps an agency understand interrelationships between investments, minimize duplication, improve interoperability and compatibility between systems, and is essential to any agency's modernization. So that's really a lot to get your arms around, but I'll focus on one specific area here, and that was that minimize duplication. When I speak to customers, that is probably the #1 reason that customers are interested in extending or improving their enterprise architecture efforts. It's around application rationalization. We speak to organizations that are fairly large, government organizations or commercial organizations, and they have some of everything. And when you look at that over the enterprise, or the width of the enterprise, they can have hundreds or thousands of applications, and there's a lot of overlap. And what they're trying to do is not only to save money, but perhaps reduce the number of vendors, simplify their architecture overall, and if they could just, cut down the number of systems that they have by 5%, 10%, we're not talking about huge gains. The benefit to them in dollars and simplification really would be great. And so this is a big thing to look into. And let me continue now with the last couple of sentences. Every agency has an EA now but it is not something that can be deployed and forgotten. EA must be kept current, and every agency must regularly evaluate how it is working in order to avoid damaging the enterprise or jeopardizing secure network systems. And so what I think about here is an expression that we use that EA is not a destination. Enterprise architecture is a journey. It's something that you have to constantly work at, reevaluate, etc., making sure that your as-is and your to-be, destinations, if you will, are in line with your organizational goals, etc. And these are constantly being reevaluated. In fact, we're going through interesting times now, so your business direction may be affected, and so your IT has to evolve as well. So the other thing that I wanted to note here is essentially the title of the slide when I wrote this, which is reaching out to the community. So what we can do really is help each other. And I'll share another anecdote as I go in the slides with regards to reaching out to other folks. So the next fortune I have here is I hear and I forget. I see and I remember. I do and I understand. So I thought that was a great one. And made me think about something that we're doing with some customers around hands-on test drives. So the big challenge we have is that when we're trying to understand a technology or an offering is how would it look like if I'm actually using it? How does it look in our particular context? Because if I give you a demonstration, then you really just, understand it within the scope of whatever it is that I'm showing you. I often think about, say, a car commercial. If you're looking at the car commercial, you see it on TV, and you're lucky if you remember the brand. But so until you go into the dealership and you start to take a look at it, then you get a better understanding of what that car is like, the size of it, et cetera. You might actually sit inside the car and see how does it feel, is it comfortable. I always care about sight lines, but then you want to actually take the car for a test drive. How does it respond? How does it corner? How does it accelerate? How does it brake, et cetera? So the same thing goes with regards to technology. And what we've done with some customers recently is that we have embarked on test drives, give them a hands-on, essentially the tactile experience of using the platform, and we found it's been really successful. The test drives run a couple of weeks, basically an hour a day for the users that they have committed to the test drive, and we found that to have been very successful. So that's another story that I wanted to share with you. So let me move to the next quote here, or the next fortune, I should say. You're never selfish with your advice or your help. So hopefully in sharing this with you today, you can also share with others. And when I looked this up, it came up with this particular Latin saying, docendo decimus, by teaching we learn. And I learned it actually, that quote in reverse, saying the best way to learn was to teach. And so in fact, in doing sessions like today, hopefully I can sharpen my skills in being able to express a message concisely. And the story I wanted to share with you actually with organizations reaching out to the community as well was between two organizations. One of them is a Department of Defense organization, and the other one was a federal civilian organization. What I've seen in the past is, at least at the federal government level, is that they would really only just communicate with organizations that were most similar to them. So military to military, or one department within a military to the other. In civilian agencies, if they had a fairly close relationship, we would see, the sharing of ideas. And in this case, I think it was a bit of a bottom-up effort that we had a consultant who had worked with a civilian organization and then had moved to a military organization. They thought, there are some EA practices going on in this other agency that we think it may be worthwhile to share and to understand. So we can, learn that way, and then we can also share our experience that way. So I think it's a two-way street when we go and we share that kind of information. And that's something that I would recommend for all of us, really. I think it's a way that all of us can benefit. So let me move to the next slide here, where the fortune cookie fortune is patience is the key to joy. And the lucky numbers there, in fact, none of the other fortunes had the lucky numbers. And so if any of you are buying lottery tickets, if any of you are buying lottery tickets, I'm going to take a percentage of this. So if anybody buys these numbers, 9, 37, 17, 31, 5, or 10, you have to share your winnings with me. So, and with regards to the title here, Only Fools Rush In, let me see if I can do this. Wise men say only fools rush in, but I can't help falling in love with you. So I don't know how many of you attend webinars where somebody actually sings, but I offer that to you right now. And that the screen capture here that I took is basically the idea of looking before you leap. And that's why I chose the Only Fools Rush In song. But here I took a little liberty with this particular graphic where one person has their due diligence parachute and the other one does not. And so the anecdote I wanted to share with you here is with a customer who wanted to make modifications to the platform before really looking at what impact that would have with regards to the implementation and perhaps, you know, forward-looking to upgrades. So any of you out there who are implementing platforms have probably faced the issue of whether the product does everything you want it to be able to do. And then if you make those particular changes, if you're going to go through an upgrade, what's going to happen to those particular changes that you made? So those are the things that you really have to evaluate and be careful about. One of my prior bosses used to talk about making haste slowly. So it's great. You might be in a hurry to do some things, but just be sure and be careful. So one of the things that often I see customers who are looking at our particular software solutions is how quickly can they get their hands on the meta model? They have their particular organization has a way of looking at data. There might be specialized data that they use. They may have been involved in implementing that particular meta model. And so when they see our platform, they want to look at the meta model. They want to see what it has and what it's missing and how quickly or easy it is to change. Well, at least in our particular platform, it's been around for more than 15 years. We've taken best practices or customer requests over that time and enhanced it. And so basically you want to be careful when you start to make those changes. And so my point here is make haste slowly, be careful with the changes that you're going to make, evaluate those, perhaps involve us and say, okay, this is an area that this is a good change perhaps to make, or this is one that perhaps we want to find an alternative to making that particular change. So the next fortune I have here is pray for what you want, but work for the things you need. And I'm based out of Northern Virginia, and so the local baseball team, the Washington Nationals, won the World Series last year, so I included that here. But the expression that we often use here is there's two different approaches that we found with organizations with regards to the enterprise architecture efforts. And the one on the left, such is represented by some do all, or in this case, perhaps one is doing a lot. While on the right is that all do some. And so if all of us contribute in our small way, we're going to be much more successful as a team. So there's no I in team, but there is EA. And so what we have found with organizations who are successful with their enterprise architecture efforts is that they involve as many people as possible. So you can have a core enterprise architecture team that set the rules for the road. Perhaps they have the reports that they want. They will help with regards to that meta model, making sure that it supports the organization. And so you can align technology with the mission, et cetera, and see that within the platform. But as quickly as possible, you want to share that with the community at large. You have the subject matter experts, you have the system owners, you have process owners, you have data owners, data architects, et cetera. If we can extend the community that uses the particular platform, then all of us will see the benefit as everyone is doing their small contribution. So we find, again, that's a big difference between, say, the person on the left, where you have that core enterprise architecture team. They undergo Herculean efforts to essentially trying to get everything in there. We have found organizations like that usually are not successful. By the time that they've collected all the information that they need, you essentially are, have to go through the next cycle again. So, in fact, there was one customer where they have a system survey, and this would be a survey that they would send out annually, essentially the government responsibility of having to collect a certain amount of information. And so it was essentially like a big bang effort every year. And so what we have evolved, or that customers evolved to, is to have something a little bit more interactive, that those subject matter experts or those system owners essentially can update data as it becomes available. The only thing they need to make sure that is it does get refreshed from time to time to make sure that data doesn't become stale. So as long as we can avoid that, this is really the best approach to have the team contributing. So let me move to the next fortune, and that is, where there is will, there is way. And what it made me think about from a customer perspective is that this is probably one of the biggest challenges that customers face when they're embarking on their EA mission, and that is collecting and integrating data. I already talked about it a little bit with regards to one of the customers in their system surveys, but different customers face different challenges. So one of them, or when I think about actually the data side of things, how do you get the data into the platform, there's two different perspectives that I think about. One is the initial upload of data. And so what you have typically is that this information, whatever's available, is in multiple places. So you have, some perhaps a configuration management database, a CMDB, some collection of systems, et cetera. It could be a homegrown EA platform. And there's going to be a good amount of data that is there. What we need to figure out is, how do we get that data in? How do we collect that so we can do that initial bulk upload? And after that, you're going to have perhaps multiple systems of record. And that becomes a challenge because you have the person, the practitioner, who's trying to look up information, and they have to look in multiple places. And so when you ask them for something, they'll say, well, let me check here. Oh, wait, it's not there. Let me check this system. Well, let me check the other system. And that just makes your work harder and harder if you have multiple sources of truth. And so what we want to be able to do is essentially establish a single pane of glass. And so what we can do is using, say, a platform's application programming interface, or API, or integration with the other platform, so we can make that data synchronize, or perhaps even do a dynamic lookup, so that when we are searching for information, we don't have to go to multiple places. We just go to one place. And so there's one of the organizations that we're speaking to is essentially has seen enterprise architecture as a service. So if there's information that they want from an EA perspective, there's one place to go, and then any other system can query it and pull on that particular information. So that could be one way of looking at it. The other thing that we've done as well is that trying to make that initial bulk upload as easy as possible. So if you have typically spreadsheets would be, if not the most common database, it's going to be a very common way of transferring information. Make sure that we have an easy way of working with spreadsheets to populate the enterprise architecture meta model as easy as possible. So these are things that we should look at, when we're looking at the challenge of getting all this data together. So when I thought about where there is will, there is way, one of the challenges, additional challenges that customers face is that, they don't know how to get to that particular data. My point is, if there's a way to get that data in a structured format, if we can get it in a structured format, there is a way to essentially extract that, massage that data, and get it into the destination platform. So let me move to the next fortune here. It is not in your nature to give up. So when I thought about that particular fortune, was a couple of things that jumped to mind. One was the challenges that you may face, but then you have the risks. And risks can take a couple of different perspectives or directions. The first one that I want to speak about is on this particular slide. It's around the Risk Management Framework 2.0. And so when I've been speaking to customers, this has come up most recently. And while I think all federal organizations are faced with this, and probably commercial organizations as well, just from a different perspective and without the specific nomenclature of RMF 2.0, but with Department of Defense organizations, this is a particular focus. They have to comply with these. There's systems often around this particular standard or framework, and also follows up on a cybersecurity framework that was implemented prior to RMF 2.0. And what you see on the screen here are the 7 high-level steps that comprise RMF 2.0. So for organizations that are implementing that, it often starts in the center. That's where you prepare, you initiate everything, and then from there you can actually go in any particular direction as denoted by the arrows there. But often the first time that RMF gets implemented for an organization, you start at 12 o'clock. You categorize the different systems, and then you select them, you implement them, and then those last 3 steps are, I think where often a lot of the subsequent iterations occur. So we assess that particular platform to make sure it complies with our controls. You have folks who are assigned to those particular roles, or the folks who own the security profile for that particular system. And then the ATO that we always hear about, the authority to operate. So you have to authorize that particular system to operate in the environment, and then you need to monitor it. And so this is on an ongoing basis. And essentially, if the profile of the platform of the software changes to the point where it'll impact the security profile, we have to go through this again. We have to at least go through that assessment again, the authorization again, and then monitor it. And so where this is coming up a lot now is in the cloud. So as you move platforms from on-premise to the cloud, say the lift and shift, or even moving to a SaaS vendor, what is the impact with regards to its risk profile? And so when we start to think about not only securing the data while it's in the cloud itself, but if that data gets transferred or what kinds of data is being transferred on-premise, et cetera, we need to be looking at all these things. So I bring all of this up is because customers who are looking at their enterprise architecture understand that security and risk has to be a part of that effort. And so what they want to be able to see now is a better integration, perhaps between their risk management platform and their enterprise architecture platform. Ideally, it would be managed by one particular system. If not, that there could be integration between the two, so that way a practitioner, again, can just go one place and get all the answers that they need. So the next fortune I want to share with you was do not be afraid of competition. And as a software vendor, when I saw this particular fortune, I thought, oh, this is great. I'll hold on to this one. Don't want to be afraid of the competition. But when I thought about it in the context of this particular session with you, it made me think about, believe it or not, the invisible hand. So the invisible hand, if you've taken any economics classes, is essentially how, through competition, we can improve, say, the outcome of whatever the service or product that we're selling. And it could be, say, costs go down, or hopefully service level goes up, quality goes up, satisfaction goes up, et cetera. And then when I was doing some searches here for today, I came upon this quote from former chairman of the Federal Reserve, Ben Bernanke. And this is where I ended up with a little bit of a conflict. Essentially, you're going to have some regulation, and especially in the government, there's just, I even mentioned the RMF 2.0, but there's other standards out there that they are required to comply with. And for commercial organizations, they're going to have their own, perhaps internal standards that they need to comply with. At the same time, you want to be able to have, perhaps some creativity. So here it says, market regulation to work. The incentives of the practitioners need to align with the regulation that we're looking for. And so what that leads to here is the next fortune that sort of flies in the face of that is that you are original and creative. And I put that in direct opposition with the quote at the top of the title, which is, we're going to do this my way, no highway option. And so if you know where that quote is from, Then 50 points to you from a pop culture perspective. That was spoken by Vin Diesel's character in the family movie called The Pacifier. So where am I going with this? What I was trying to do is to say, look, from a government perspective or regulation perspective, we have all of these requirements. And over time, federal government has, through different legislation, required organizations to enhance their enterprise architecture, their reporting, their maturity, et cetera. So starting back more than 20 years ago with the Clinger-Cohen Act, and then some efforts that followed from that, the FIAF architecture and FIAF framework and the DODAF framework. And then more recently, we had the Cloud First program, so that we would close data centers, which has now evolved to Cloud Smart. And now we have the report cards around FITARA. And now most recently, we have TBM. And so TBM, standing for Technology Business Management, is by adopting a standard taxonomy around IT towers and cost pools, we can get transparency into our IT spend. And at the higher level, it's to get clarity on the cost of delivering a particular capability. And through TBM, we can have potentially benchmarks and understand how perhaps one organization delivers on a capability at less expense or perhaps better quality than another organization. And so we have all these particular standards. But the challenge here is that how do I then become creative, or how can I be original when I have these particular frameworks? And therein lies the challenge. And so here what I imagine is that, can we comply with the regulation and still say color between the lines? And so, for example, when we think about the DODAF standard, that's one that's come to mind. And when I speak to some practitioners of DODAF, is that the requirements for DODAF are all explaining what the objective is of that particular, the way DODAF speak, is view or viewpoint. So you can have a capability view or a process view or a system or service view. And there's objectives with each particular view. But what they don't tell you is how that view should or must be implemented. It's not prescriptive. So there is some flexibility within that particular framework. So what we want to be able to do is essentially understand what the requirements are, but then perhaps say, still coloring between the lines, perhaps apply our creativity there to say, how else may I be able to achieve this particular objective? So that's some of the things that I'm seeing now within the federal government, and also as we work with our product development, something that we can bring along. So let me move to the next fortune. And I like this one when I saw it. You're a contemplative and analytical by nature. So I think I actually am, or hopefully I am. But I thought this would work very well for this particular audience. And what I hear about customers with regards to this is that they want to be able to make decisions that are based on data. And one of my colleagues shared just the information, and I'm sure it wasn't original, but he said, the data doesn't lie. The data is not emotional. It doesn't have any political points to score, et cetera. The data is the data. Now, how we interpret it, that may be colored by our own different opinions or objectives, but the data is the data. And so the screenshot that we're looking here, this actually comes from our platform at Software AG. And the anecdote I wanted to share with you is that what you're looking at here is a lifecycle support Gantt chart. And if you look at that vertical blue line over on the right-hand side, that represents more or less today's date. So we're in late April, so the beginning of the second quarter. And what you see on the left-hand side at the very top there in the graphic is a particular system, in this case, General Manager. And then there's technologies that are listed below it. And what you see to the right, and you could see the legend at the bottom so you understand what the colors are, but is the support lifecycle for each of those particular components that support that system. And so what we see here is that, hey, most of those support life cycles have expired. There's only a couple that are still current. And so this is actually looking at risk from a different perspective. Before, we were looking at specifically around the security of a platform. But here we have risk to the organization because we may be running on a platform that is no longer supported. So we have to make sure that we're careful about that. When I was working with one of my customers, I had a contracting officer look at this particular screen, and he was speaking to his enterprise architecture team all the way up to the chief enterprise architect, and we spent over 20 minutes on this particular view. And what he felt was essentially, when we think about application rationalization, when we think about perhaps targeting systems to be deprecated, this would be a top candidate. So essentially, if we could collect all the information, for our systems for this essentially would be able to give us the priority or triage on how we want to be able to start reducing the number of systems that we have within the enterprise. So with that, I'm coming to an end. Will, perhaps I'll go just a little bit further, but I wanted to recap these particular items in the fortune and the titles of the slides that I showed you today. So at the top, Decendo Decimus. So by teaching, we learn, reaching out to the community, essentially by sharing our experiences with other community practitioners or enterprise architecture practitioners, we will all benefit. Look before you leap. So if you can think about the fact that you had somebody think you during your webinar today, that only fools rush in, that the community or the enterprise architecture of the organization will improve by getting more people involved. Let's use the team and not the individual. Think about having that hands-on or tactile experience if you're going to adopt a platform. I know we all deal with the challenges of collecting data, but that's something that we may be able to resolve. Understanding risks and the different ways that it presents itself within the organization, and perhaps by having some competition, how we might be able to improve some things using that invisible hand and work within how we can color between the lines there. And then obviously being able to improve our decision-making based on data. And so with my last slide, I'll share the last two fortunes that I picked up here that I still actually gotten some Vietnamese pho to go in the last month, and I gotten these couple of fortunes, and I want to share these with you. And starting with the one on the right, from now on, your kindness will lead you to success. So if all of us are kind and all of us can be successful, and last but not least, you will have a long and healthy life. So hopefully that wasn't just a fortune for me, but a fortune for everyone on this particular call. And with that, Will, I'll take questions.
Thanks so very much, Nelson. I'm going to just jump in on the first one I have. You mentioned the test drive. How do you sign up for one?
So signing up for one, we don't sign up individuals for test drives. This is more from an organizational perspective. So we've offered the test drives to organizations who are interested in adopting our platform. And so this is more of an organizational commitment. And so we wouldn't have just a single person taking a test drive. The last one that I was observing, I think we had about 5 to 6 people participating. It's over the course of a couple of weeks. It was just an hour each day as far as being the synchronized, learning, essentially distance learning that we had. So, total commitment of those desktop sharing sessions was about 10 hours, but it's over the course of a couple of weeks. So this is really an organizational commitment. But if this is something that your organization is interested in, then I have the email at the bottom, info@softwareaggov.com. Please reach out to us. We'll talk further, and then we'll see if something like the test drive could be a good fit for you.
Okay, the next question I have for you, which could be related for organizations adopting Software AG's EA platform, how long does it take to get started?
Wow, so that's a good question. That's something that I get from customers a lot. I get it usually probably in a slightly different context, is that how quickly can they derive value? That's usually what customers are trying to do, because if they adopt another platform, they may have embarked on enterprise architecture efforts in the past. Now, if they're going to embrace our particular platform, how quickly do they see value? And so what we have done, actually, we have created an accelerator for government organizations. And where that comes in was essentially the focus of the accelerator itself was around that. How can we help customers derive value as quickly as possible? And the focus of the accelerator was around business questions, or is around business questions. Basically, essentially, what we're hearing from you, we made those questions part of that accelerator. And some of them will be, say, fairly standard across any large organization with enterprise architecture, understanding the systems, who owns them, what purpose, et cetera. When we've made this particular for government is, for example, supporting the federal enterprise architecture framework. So that's something that's built in within the platform, et cetera. But the whole, again, just to, I guess, be more concise, is that the accelerator helps the customers essentially receive value as quickly as possible. There's quick upload of features, the graphics around there, features that we call around gamification, which is just essentially through, call it agile data collection, you can improve the reporting and impact on enterprise architecture, et cetera. So those are some of the things that, that we could help you with.
Okay, perfect. Those are the questions that we have at this point. I'd like to just take the opportunity to draw everyone's attention to the contact information that Nelson does have on the screen. Certainly take that down in case you think you might need it subsequently, and don't hesitate to reach out to us. Additionally, we do want to invite you to keep up with all of the programs that we are planning this coming year. We do have a full schedule of programs that are supporting both our federal and our state and local markets. So to stay up to date with us, visit the events page under the company tab at softwareag.com, and all relevant programs that could be of interest to you can be had there, and you can just click on the registration buttons. Nelson, thank you so much for what was insightful and a fun presentation today. With that, our program has ended. Thanks to everybody for joining us. Enjoy the rest of your day.